Hey guys, what is up? It is Nick the Polymath, and that's the name I'm going with for now. I've been told by a bunch of people that I should start a YouTube channel to talk about my opinions, which is kind of a scary thought. But I have spent an incredible amount of time studying history, politics, science, and many other topics. I consider myself a polymath, and today we are going to start off with something controversial. Who would have guessed that? Anyone who knows me would have guessed that. So, we all know what just happened. Donald Trump not only won the presidency, but he won the popular vote. That does not happen. The last time that happened was 2004 with George Bush, which that was manipulated because there's a thing called weaponized voting, where they will put something on the ballot at the same time as something else. So, for example, in 2004 in Pennsylvania and a bunch of other swing states, they put gay marriage on the ballot. And many Republicans who are very against gay marriage showed up and voted against that, and then they vote up ballot for the president. That is how George Bush won the second time. The first one was most likely fraud, but that's a totally different story for a totally another time. This is an unprecedented change from last time. Very few people thought it was possible for Trump to win even the Electoral College, let alone the actual popular vote. And there could be many reasons for that. We've had less votes than last time, which means there could have been less show up because people are disappointed with their party or various other reasons. I can understand that sentiment because in 2020, I voted for Joe Biden. And I do not regret that. If you go back to the debates then, you will see that Joe Biden was relatively sharp. He had good points, and I was a lot younger and didn't understand politics the way that I do now. I really thought that was Donald Trump who was dividing the country. And during the 4 years Biden was in office, things only got divided more. And I realized that was because of the media not being transparent or honest about the things that happened. So this converted me to this year. I voted for Donald Trump. And you can judge me, you can say whatever you want. I do not support many of the Republican ideals. The idea of banning gay marriage, banning abortion, I do think are bad. I'm not sure that they will do that, and I do not think they do that. If they do that, there will need to be even more changes, but that's more for a video about how we need to change the Republican Party. This video is about how we need to change the Democratic Party. And I would be very happy to vote for a Democrat. I was actually going to vote for RFK, and I know that might get a bunch of bad responses. I know people judge him, people say he's anti-vax, but he's not anti-vax. He's against certain specific types of vaccines that have things like mercury and other things that should not be in them, that are illegal in other countries. He's against chemical additives to our food that are illegal in other countries. I think that's a great thing. I obviously am not the healthiest person. I actually take a lot better care of myself than it probably looks. I have horrible genetics. But I grew up eating horrible food. Now I eat all organic. And I try and take much better care of myself. The problem is, in most countries, you don't have to worry about that. Things are just healthier to begin with. And obviously, he was a Democrat, and he switched sides the same way that Tulsi Gabbard switched sides, Elon Musk switched sides, and many others. And with that hope, I think everyone who voted for Trump is hoping he takes a much more populist vote and doesn't lose his mind. If he does lose his mind, it's certainly up to us in the 2026 elections to make sure the Senate and House do not go his way. But I just have good prayers for our country. So let's hope that is a non-issue. So I broke up this list in two ways. There are two categories related to the rhetoric and related to policy as a whole. So the first thing might be the most controversial, but I think it's undeniable that the Epstein Diddy Committee, as I like to call them, the people who were associated with both Epstein, who's obviously much worse, as far as we know, and Diddy, are out there campaigning for the Democrats, along with Dick Cheney, which is very bad. Dick Cheney, if I had a pick of the worst presidents ever, George Bush and Obama are number 1 and 2. What they did in the wars were horrible. And Dick Cheney was the CEO of Halliburton before he became vice president, and then awarded them, I think, $130 billion. Don't quote me on that. That might not be. It was over 30 to 40 billion. I'm not sure if it was 40 billion or 130. I know that's a huge range. But an incredible amount of contracts for managing, I believe, pipelines and gas lines in the Middle East after we blew them up. So he's a very, very corrupt man, and him and Liz Cheney are not people that we want on the Democratic side. We do not want Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman is a well-known associate of Epstein. Elon Musk has talked a lot about that. There's actual factual evidence behind that. There is Bill Clinton, who we know was friends with Epstein and very likely involved with him. And then on the Diddy side, we have J-Lo warning people about Trump, but not about Diddy, which I know that's a meme, but that is a real thing. That's a huge problem. We have Beyonce, the wife of Jay-Z. I wonder if she's trying to protect her husband from the things he's done. And of course, LeBron James, who I love basketball, but it can't be ignored that he literally said, there's no party like a Diddy party. Who knows what type of Diddy parties he actually went to, but that's a problem. So Democrats are supposed to be the party of the people. We need to get rid of the Epstein Diddy Committee. Kick them out. We don't need them. Bill Clinton will probably die anyway, but we don't need the rest of them. So there's a level of hateful rhetoric, and it's on both sides. It's not one or the other, but they have spewed so much hateful rhetoric towards Donald Trump specifically that I think it was part of keeping him so famous and relevant that he won this election. If they weren't trying to keep Donald Trump relevant, which I think may have been a strategy where they keep Donald Trump relevant and expect to win vote, or expect to be able to beat him in the polls. And I think that plan completely backfired because of everything that happened. We can do much better. If we have better policy, we can convince people that way. We shouldn't just be the party of, oh, we're not Trump. And that makes us better. Because clearly that did not work, and there's a huge, or not a huge majority, but a decent majority of the country who agrees with that. And obviously to the point where it got them out there to vote. So I do think, as a whole, the Democratic Party does not have good candidates, and that's part of the problem. Josh Shapiro's good. There's a couple other. But if you look, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were horrible candidates as far as being able to speak and debate. Kamala is decent with rehearsed lines, but when you see her in an interview, it's a mess. And people can... Trump's also a mess at times. J.D. Vance is not a mess. Vivek Ramaswamy is one of the most articulate people I've ever heard talk. You cannot put someone like whoever the next up in the Democratic Party is. Josh Shapiro, maybe you could. But you cannot put, I almost want to say Elizabeth Warren, up there with J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy, AOC, who they wanted to run for something. You cannot put these people up against them. They're going to get crushed. And maybe there's better Democratic candidates and they just don't get shown the light of day for whatever reason. But we can't have the Republicans have two of the best speakers and debaters there is in politics right now and not try to match it. We need to find better people to be Democrats. And I think, honestly, the best one might be Michael Bloomberg. Mark Cuban, I do respect him as a person. I've heard him on many podcasts, and he cannot articulate his points that well, so I don't think he's a specifically good option. The best option we actually got was probably Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of, I believe, JP Morgan. It might be Goldman Sachs. It's one of those big banks. And obviously people don't like bankers, but someone like that has a lot of a chance running a big organization, and he was willing to do it. He understands financial risk. He understands economics. He understands all these very important things. And for some reason, it was just never shown the light of day. You need to get better left-wing influencers. They have Ben Shapiro, Officer Tatum, there's Amala something, she's a good influencer, all with millions of followers. Joe Rogan says himself, he is more left than he is right. And for some reason, having ideas that are not mainstream is almost like a right-wing ideology, so people say that about him. Like, people start talking about what I talked about with the Epstein-Diddy committee, and people are like, oh, you're a far-right conspiracy theorist, this, that, and the other thing. No. There's a serious issue with people being afraid to think freely, not only in this country, but in the entire world, especially when there's countries that persecute you for it. We're in America. We have the First Amendment, which is a huge reason why I voted for Donald Trump. They have openly said Hillary Clinton, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, they need to have more control over what's said so they can control the rhetoric. And that is not what we want in this country. The Democratic Party was the party of the people for a long time. And now it's the party of elite tech entrepreneurs and pharmaceutical and war. The way the Electoral College is set up, Democrats aren't going to win an election ever again. Or, that's obviously being hyperbolic with the Electoral College without winning the popular vote. Republicans can do that because the Electoral College is set up that way. And people can talk about gerrymandering, and gerrymandering gets way worse than everything you think, because if you look at California, you'll see how they gerrymander school districts to make it so the rich schools, the rich people have the district set up so they support their schools for their kids. So the rich people paying taxes are actually just paying taxes for their own kid's school. So it's very unfair to the lower income people. You could easily get Joe Rogan to support a Democrat. He was all in for RFK for a long time. We need to stop making things about race, about gender. That is divisive, and you need to be a party that is unitive, especially with the current climate. Who knows 4 years where the country's going to be at. We need to be a party of unity if you want to be able to win elections. And dividing everything, like this whole white guys for Kamala, everything else for Kamala, they separate everything by race and gender, and that's not what, that's so far against the ideology, it's crazy. And on top of that, they alienate men and white people because they say, oh, you were born with all this privilege. Most of us were not born with privilege. My dad is a 7th generation lobsterman, which people think lobster, like, oh, you must make tons of money. No, lobstermen are poor. I grew up very, very poor. And to tell me that I had an advantage because of my race, if I did, it's not palpable. Look at Obama. Obama's dad was an ambassador to Kenya, and he got into Harvard Law School. That's much more privilege than 90% of white people ever have, and that's just the reality. I do understand women do have more issues with that, but to alienate such a huge percentage of the voter base is just a surefire way to lose. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is stop talking about Donald Trump. He won. He's 78 years old. He'll be 82 years old when his presidency ends and he cannot run again. People are going to be like, oh, he's going to do it. No, he's not. He's already said it's going to be a really interesting primary the next time he's out. I don't think he's going to try and do something where he becomes king of the world and then like Eric or Don Jr. takes over after him. That's not realistic. People would actually try to assassinate them then probably. And I just don't think that's his actual plan. I think he probably wants to make people think he's not the worst president ever, because he isn't. And he's not the best president ever, but he's certainly not the worst president when you compare even George Bush, the Iraq War, everything he did. He bombed everywhere besides where those people who did 9/11, whether you want to say it was him or terrorists. Sorry, I need to grab my dog. She's a beautiful bulldog. You guys, I'm sure, will love her in the future. 9/11's a whole thing, you know. There's a chance we did it. But it was a bunch of people from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Egypt. And we bombed Afghanistan and Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. And that kind of gets ignored, but that's a way worse thing to do than anything Trump did. And people talk about January 6th. January 6th is a very complicated thing. I have friends who know people who were there. And honestly, there was genuinely bad actors there. And there was a lot of people who were just there using their right to protest. And more violence happened during the Black Lives Matter protests right before that than in January 6th. So I don't think that's the worst thing. Donald Trump didn't call in Eric Prince to send in Blackwater to take over the Capitol, which he might have been able to do. So that's as far as rhetoric. Now we are going to be talking about becoming a better version of the left. So I'd like to start this with, we need to stop DEI. DEI sounds great, but to list something, say you need a certain percent of this race, this gender, that gender, it creates issues as far as finding the best candidates. And I think this was, there's a study that shows Asians in the top 99th percentile, or in the top 1%, I don't know how you actually say that, who were smarter than 99% of people, had better scores, better academic, better qualifications, were less likely to get into an elite school than an African who was in the 40th percentile. That's absolutely absurd and wrong. And that might get me called racist. I might talk about Black history at some point. It's a very interesting thing to me. We have done horrible things in this country to them. We've done horrible things to a lot of people in this country, Native Americans, and we don't treat them the same way. It's absolutely incredible to me that you can have that much of a disparity in what it takes to get into one of these elite schools. We need to have better regulations. The Democrats are the party of regulations, and essentially, the regulations do not work because these government agencies such as the FDA, is it EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, these organizations are all bought off by the people in business, the corporations. I truly do believe a more Bernie Sanders, and I forgot about Bernie Sanders when I was talking about smart Democrats. Bernie Sanders is a better left than the current left we have that is just sell out corporations, and that's a reality. They sell out to war and pharmaceutical companies. You can't be a populist party and do those things. It's just against what your constituents actually want. You might hear my dog snore. She likes to do that. So with going further with the left, I know socialism's a dirty word. We are halfway to a socialist country anyway, if you look at all of our social systems. We need to fix the healthcare system. We spend on average, I think it's 8 to 10 times what other countries do in medicine. Part of that's because of how the patent system works, because we have the best biotech companies and they create the drugs here, so they have patents here. It's a complicated process because then they go to another country and they're like, oh, if you're going to sell it for that price, we'll just make our own because you don't have a patent here. That creates huge problems. People might say, oh, well, they just passed a bill that the top 10 most used drugs are capped at $35 a month. That was Trump. Trump is the one who started to push that bill, and this is something that happens commonly in politics where they will delay a bill, like the border bill. The border bill, which that got put down for a bunch of other reasons too, as well as they just keep trying to give money to Ukraine. Although Trump said he's going to give money to Ukraine if Putin doesn't surrender, and that's kind of his strategy, is to give them so much money that Putin can't actually fight them off. Healthcare is super unaffordable for many, many people. We need to do better with it. We need to have cheaper healthcare. I pay $360 for an inhaler every month. I have a friend who, because he's in a much lower income bracket, he pays $5 a month. That's insane. And this is a reality. People who make more money have to pay for other people's health insurance when that dude, it's his decision to not have money. He doesn't work. And that's one of the benefits. If you don't work, you get things for free. I understand being disabled, but there's no way I should have to pay such an extreme amount that someone, like, if you don't have a good job, I have a great job, you can't afford to do that. Most people couldn't afford to live with paying an extra $400 a month bill. I mean, with my health insurance, it's $580 just for that. And then I have inhaler too. So it's like, or non-inhaler, nasal spray. So it's like $700 a month for my medicine alone. I need to pay these companies just to live. And it should be sickening to people. But instead, these companies just take advantage of us. And this is a Republican thing too. It's not just Democrats. Both sides are completely bought off by pharmaceutical companies. And both companies are bought off by the military-industrial complex. Don't forget that either. Democrats aren't the only ones who want these wars. Republicans want these wars just as much. And you might get occasionally a statement from a Democrat saying, oh, we don't support the war. But then they still give, or, like the war in Palestine, because for some reason it's a political thing where, like, if you're a Republican, you need to support Israel. If you're a Democrat, you need to support Ukraine, which has never made much sense to me because I'm against both wars. And that's another thing. We need to stop going to war. And I say that, and it's a much more complicated thing because it seems very simple just saying that. But because the debt situation in our country is so bad, the American currency is the reserve currency of the world. They call it the U.S. petrodollar. They essentially trade oil in our currency. Libya is a great example. They wanted to do something else, so we killed them and put them into... We killed Gaddafi, put them into civil war, wrecked the country. We're doing the same thing in the Middle East. We fight these wars in the Middle East to make sure that we control their oil, and all the countries around the world need to be supplied by our oil, which is in our currency, which keeps the value of our currency up because they need to keep stocks of it. So we are reaching such a high debt to GDP ratio that over time, what you'll find is, I think it's projected by 2035, Social Security will be bankrupt and we'll need to put something like $20 trillion back into it to make it sustainable. That and all the other incursions we're going to have, we're spent at about $3.8 trillion deficit a year. That is going to put us around $90 trillion in debt, which means we'll be paying $3 trillion, which is exactly what we actually bring in. Obviously, it should increase by then, but that will mean, whatever it is, if we bring in $5 trillion, if we raise our GDP by 66%, which normally we do, I believe, 3 to 4% a year, that's super unrealistic for us to get to. 3/5 of the money, 60% of the money, so we're looking at 60 to 75% of the money that gets brought in just going to serve that. And that means that we need to make sure the world can't have another currency. So that's why we need to keep at war with countries like Russia, and maybe, we do a coup in Brazil or India or a country like that supports BRICS. Because if BRICS ever did take off, it would mean incredible trouble for the US economy because we rely on people needing our currencies. This is a whole other thing where we've been lying about economic metrics for a long time now. And so there's the jobs. We lied about how many jobs were created. We lied about... So there's a thing called the velocity of money. And essentially how the velocity of money works is when you give someone $1, that dollar doesn't end with them. They take that dollar and spend it somewhere else. That person takes that, spends it somewhere else. And the velocity of money is normally a yearly thing. So you figure out with, if the government spends $1 trillion on something, the average velocity of money is around 1.75. So it works out that the $3.8 trillion extra we've been spending works out to $6.65 trillion when accounted for the velocity of money. That's almost exactly where GDP has grown. And this is why Elon Musk talks about growing pains, because that's so unrealistic to have grown our GDP by $7 trillion, which is about a quarter of total GDP, through spending of money that we don't have, and then we're taking out debt on that money, and we have to pay that debt back, and eventually we just won't be able to pay that debt back. There's also the fact that they lied about crime rates, and the FBI, of course, updated them, no one noticed. But there's been so much lying about the metrics that you've lost a lot of the trust of the people. So they need to make unions better. Unions are a complicated thing. Obviously, we saw the recent longshoreman strike, which many people didn't even know what a longshoreman was before that. And they really showed the power that a union has because they raised their wages by 66%. That's a very high-paying union. To be a longshoreman, you need to work very long hours, and I'm pretty sure you need to pull your weight. That's not true with every union. So there's a union at the local Bath Iron Works, which is a General Dynamics company. And people who work there tell me their boss will tell them to go to the bathroom for the rest of the shift, or they don't want to see them for the rest of the shift just to hide, because they only need to do a certain amount of work because of the union. And that might seem like, oh, that's cool, you can just hide. But what you're actually doing is wasting time and economic output. You could have, wherever it is, 1/3 less people, and then pay everyone 50% more money. So instead of people averaging $25 an hour, then they're getting $37.50, whatever it is. That's a huge jump. A better example is construction companies. Everyone's seen the construction company that's unionized. They got 2 people working and 10 people sitting around, or 8 people sitting around is better for this example. So let's say they're all getting $25 an hour, and you have 8 people sitting around. Obviously, some people need breaks, so maybe you do need 2 extra people, so you need 4 people. Those 4, instead of 10 people taking up $25 each, there could be 3 people or 4 people getting $62.50 apiece. And essentially people are getting underpaid because unions allow people to be lazy. And some people might think that's good. I do not think that's good. I think that's bad for economic output. So there's, of course, anti-Semitism. And I know people want to try and deny it, like, Doug Emhoff was Jewish, but no, it's real. It's in schools, and it hasn't been enforced. The government tried to step in and get people to be less less anti-Semitic. My great grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. I have Muslim families. I'm personally a Christian. I think religion should not be something you're judged by, and people definitely shouldn't be anti-Semitic over something that's going on the other side of the world. Just because people are pro-Israel or Palestine doesn't mean they're bad. The thing, I do not approve of what Israel has done. I think the Israel conversation is much more complicated than what people understand. And I think it's very hard to come up with an actual solution of how to fix it. But that's a problem that was started in the 1920s by the British Empire. And we still are cleaning up that mess. And at some point, we'll need to figure out a solution. I truly, in my heart, believe Israel needs to be moved. I feel like, annex a piece of Canada, maybe they buy it from them, or another spot, but they'll never be welcome there. Because even if the majority of Muslims are good, it's the loud minority. The majority of Germans in the 1940s were good. And you see what the silent minority did. The silent minority can do horrible things, and it creates a lot of problems. So we need to change the climate conversation. And it's not that I'm a climate change denier. It's that framework doesn't work, and it's not very convincing. So if you look at Earth's temperatures through the years, there have been times where Earth temperatures have been as high as 94 degrees was the average temperature on the Earth. I think right now we're at 68. So there's huge fluctuations that we do not control. We can theorize that things are getting hotter, and people, they go outside, they're like, oh, things are getting hotter because, it's November and today was 75 outside. But we live such short lives that we don't actually understand these things. There was actually a thing called a Little Ice Age that was from the 1300s until the 1800s, where temperatures lowered by 10 degrees. And I believe we're still in the cycle of that raising as we speak. I'm not 100% sure. I did not fact check that. But there are many temperature changes throughout history. And the bigger thing that I think people should talk about is resource management. We all live here on this earth. We have a limited amount of resources, whether it's oil, lithium, cobalt, titanium, iron we have plenty of if we could ever get to the core. But Elon Musk's best point is that we need to become an interplanetary species if we want to ensure the long-term survival of the world. If we just stay here, we could live like people did in the 13 and 1400s and probably survive indefinitely. I do not think you could convince people to go back to that. I think that over time, we've grown accustomed to having too good of a lifestyle. And if we want if we want to continue getting better lifestyles, if we want everyone in the world to live how they do in countries like America, then what we actually need to do is find a way to gather resources from outer space, because there are not enough here, or we need to figure out better renewable resources. And we need to do that within the finite amount of resources that we have here on Earth. That's very hard to it's very hard to do because we haven't done it. Maybe it's easy if we actually can figure it out. But if we use all of the oil, all the lithium, cobalt, all of these materials before we can successfully figure out a way to get more, our species is going to go back to the 1300s. And not only that, we'll never get that chance again. If we use all those resources now, we go back to a lower state of being, a lower technological state. It will create huge problems. And I don't think people want to live like that. And if we don't have the resource, if we manage our resources improperly, we won't be able to do that. And that's a much better argument that I feel like just isn't mentioned that often. All right. So I got a couple more points. Immigration is great. Immigration is the lifeblood of America. We need workers. We have the strongest economy in the world, even though all the other factors I said, we still have the strongest. And the problem isn't immigrants. It's the fact that we don't vet them anymore. I think the current Democratic Party has moved into such an anti-Trump rhetoric that because he was against immigration, if you look at Obama was literally called the deporter-in-chief. He deported, I think, 3 million immigrants, and that was a policy the Democrats had before. And that changed because Trump was kicking them out, and then suddenly the Democrats are like, we need to do the complete opposite of everything that is Trump. And that has led to this crazy immigration situation where we are allowing criminals in. People can say, no, we're not. Yes, we are. I've met some of them and talked to them, like, just talking to people because I talk to everyone. And they're not shy to be like, oh yeah, I'm from Venezuela. I got out of jail and they sent me here. And that might sound like a crazy thing. That's an actual conversation I've had. And he was telling me how much better the jail he went to here was because he went to jail here and they let him out. And that's absolutely insane. A side note, this should have been in the other section, but I think that with DEI, they have been pushing trans and gay things so far down the average person's throat that it's made them upset about it. And it's made people who wouldn't dislike them because it gets shoved down your throat. People don't like it. So now I'm going to talk about another controversial thing that I think would actually get Joe Rogan on the left team. And I think that's an important thing because if you could get someone like that, some people don't like him. You guys need better influencers. If they have all the influencers, and I think this election shows that, the right's going to continue to win. So in many other countries, and this is part of the going further left, drugs are completely legal. Like, Amsterdam, there's harm reduction. There have been a lot of studies that show if we give... It would also solve the fentanyl problem. It would hurt the prospects of the gangs and cartels because they wouldn't be able to make so much money. If you could just go to a place, and I think J.D. Vance and Joe Rogan said this in his podcast, you can't even do cocaine anymore without dying because they put fentanyl in it. And that's crazy. You could get these drugs safely and legally, and those ones you probably don't like talking about, the idea of heroin and cocaine, that's probably a much more complicated thing. Although I do think the benefits of people having safe access to it, because they're going to get it either way, it's good. And people don't feel like, people don't get that, oh, it's illegal, so it's a cool idea. There's also the benefits of things like LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin, which I know psilocybin is slowly becoming legal in more states. Those drugs do have serious positive positive effects on people's lives. Some people say it completely changes their lives and makes it considerably better. 1/3 of the drugs that the FDA approve get recalled and do horrible things. If you look at what happened with the Sackler family, they don't get punished. They're just cartels, but legal. There should be safe access to these types of therapies that people go down to Mexico and places like that for in America. And the fact that there isn't and they're not open to it has always just been strange to me. And I don't think the right would ever do that. I think that could be a winning thing for the left. Anyways, I talked for a long time. This is a very long video for my first video, but obviously this is something that I've talked a lot about. I might have not been 100% right about everything, and I don't think I am. I think no one's right about everything, but I think having discussion is the only way we can improve the current situations we're in. And I hope you enjoyed If you think there's something I can do better, let me know. If you liked it, like it, subscribe, because hopefully I'll be doing more talks. I'm not sure how long each of them. I'd say most of them aren't going to be 40 minutes like this one. Anyways, have a great day, and I wish you the best.